jump into talking about these wonderful people here and kind of jump into what we're saying about them and how we work with them. Hopefully things are going well with you, and we're going to jump into this conversation right here. But as I talk about the 25th Dynasty, I want to kind of make it known that the only reason I'm saying 25th Dynasty, or the only reason I'm saying 25th Dynasty is so that you'll know what I'm talking about, so people will know what I'm talking about. But as we think about this 25th Dynasty, one of the most important things I want to say up front is that they were a dynasty of their own right. They weren't just the people who helped to take over ancient Kemet. They were the people who were a dynasty in their own right. And so it's important to understand that. And this was a family that developed and produced some remarkable people, a remarkable line of people. And we're going to talk about that and go ahead and jump into that today. And as you see right here, what I have up on the map right here, you'll see a map of Upper and Lower Kemet in the north and Upper and Lower Nubia kind of in the south, just so you can get some idea of what we're talking about in the area of the world that we're talking about. So you start to look at this area that is Upper Nubia, and you start to look at where it says Kerma there by the Third Cataract and Jebel Barco and Napata and Kuru and Nuri and those places. You start to see the heart of where this 25th dynasty, this remarkable Kushite dynasty and Kushite kingdom was from. But if you notice it, you get an idea that the Upper Nubia part that we think about in terms of a geographical setting really is the southern part is going around the fifth or sixth cataract, going all the way up to the second cataract where you see the border of modern day Sudan and modern day Egypt. So that's Upper Nubia. And when you get from that border of modern day Sudan and Upper Egypt, right around Kustul and Buhin, right there to the first cataract canal, that's Lower Nubia. So just to give you an idea where Upper and Lower Nubia is. And as we think about this Kushite dynasty, if you will, and we think about this family, we're going to kind of go ahead and kind of jump into things about them because they begin to be, I believe, a remarkable set of people. They have a remarkable, just whole family line that they're working with. So I think about that, and I look at that. One of the places you think about is the ancient city of Kerma. So we got an idea of where they were geographically. Let's think about what we're talking about in terms of a timeline perspective. And one of the things that jumps out at you is the city of Kerma. So as we talk about this whole area and the city of Kerma that's right there by the Third Cataract, this is the heartland, if you will, the heart of the Kushite Empire. But the Kushite Empire doesn't just begin with the Kushite family that we're going to talk about. Obviously, it has a huge, long history, and it's worth us talking about that as we jump into that. Thank you. God bless you. There you go, Simotep. God bless you as well. Thank you for present and watching. Thank you so much. God bless you. Hope you're having a good day. I hope you're having a good day. So as we think about that and we start to jump into that, you're just from a time period of history, if you will. So, a lot of times the focal point of Kerma and the city of Kerma that we'll talk about and how that was the seat of part of the Kushite Empire and the area that became Kush, you're going back thousands of years. You're going back thousands of years before this time period. And it's not just Kerma that we talk about. We go beyond that and we talk about pre-Kerma areas. So if you go back 3,500 BC, 3,500 years before Christ, you're going to see activity and people in the area that is Kerma, that area that's around the Third Cataract of now in modern day Sudan. But you got to remember, human beings come from Africa. So you're not going to look at Eastern Africa and just found people there 5,000 years ago. I mean, you literally will go back hundreds of thousands of years. You can go back 200,000 years and go back in the Sai Island, which is right in that northern part of northern Sudan. You can go back to Sai Island and find 200,000 years, 200,000 to 300,000 years of activity, human ancestral activity and human activities. You have artifacts and archaeological evidence going back, as I said, hundreds of thousands of years in Sai Island in northern Sudan. And obviously, when you think about Ethiopia and the whole area, in Kenya and Chad, you're talking millions of years of history. So, it's really important because when we talk about the ancient Kushite people, a lot of times we have a way of talking about them and kind of putting them in a box. And it's really important for you to think about it, that you're talking about a people that grew out of a long history, right? And that you can't put them in this narrow timeline or limit a lot of things. We have to look at them with the same lens we want people to look at us, right? What did we do? What are the significant things? Where do we come from? How long does our history go back? How does one group of people contribute to another group of people? So as we're thinking about that, and we're jumping to that whole era that is Kush, and thinking about that, it's a whole long history. And as you start to look at that, as I mentioned, it's not just the people there, it's people that go back beyond that, hundreds of thousands of years. And I kind of give you just a little bit of a showing of, this is one of the temples that was built in the ancient city of Kerma, that's thousands of years old, that was built, a long time ago. And it's a part of what was a center of religious activity. So when you think about this, and we want to know that we can go back 200,000 years and more for human activity in this area, if we want to kind of give ourselves a timeline and kind of cut it off a little bit, or give ourselves more of a modern or more recent timeline, then we can go back to like 3500 BC. We can start to looking at that area, but know that human activity is all up and down the Nile Valley. It's all up and down Northeast Africa and African period. In the world period for many thousands of years, in particular for hundreds of thousands of years and millions of years in Africa, where you look at human ancestral activity. So as we think about the people who would become the empire of Kush, they are coming off of a long line of people and of strong people and of people who are doing things. So even if you go back to 3500 BC and you look there at the land of Kerma, there is already activity up and down the Nile. You already find trade. There's already interaction with not just the people in Kerma, but they're interacting through trade routes up and down and now. They interact with people in the Middle East, what we call today's Middle East, people farther south in Central Africa. You know, you can think about the connections with the land of Punt and all that's going on in the southern area right here. So you're talking about Upper Nubia, Lower Nubia, Upper Kemet, Lower Kemet, what we call today's Middle East, what you call Central Africa, the Horn of Africa, west of the Nile Valley. This whole area is trading. This whole area is teeming with people and human activity. So we can't really put that in a box, if you will. This teeming with human activity. And you have a period of time, obviously, where you're going to have the rise of what was called the Yam Empire, and then maybe the Kushite Empire. And you have a period of time where obviously they're interacting with ancient Kemet. And there are times when ancient Kemet comes into Lower Nubia, and there are times when they come into Upper Nubia. They come in there for trading reasons, and they come in there for fighting reasons, for war reasons. Many times, and don't get it confused, a lot of times people will put this broad brush over Nubia and not really look at the distinctions between the people who had their own political entities. I mean, there were different societies in Lower Nubia and in Upper Nubia. And sometimes when ancient Kemet is taking over Lower Nubia, people will just say they took over Nubia and make it think like that meant that they were somehow taking over Upper Nubia as well, the people there, as well as that whole region, or Punt, that they were taking over everything. And that was not the case. You really have to look at specifically who they're talking about. And it's us in this day and age that a lot of times just generalizes the whole place. A lot of times, many times in ancient Kemetic documents, they talk about the societies with whom they interact, whether they were in Lower Nubia or Upper Nubia. They talk about them specifically by name. Right? And they weren't calling them Nubians. You know, the Hesse, you would say Southerners in the Hesse, they would say the Urjet, the Wawet. They would say Kush by name. They would say Yam by name. They would say these people because they were different societies and different political entities. So I just wanted to say that and kind of get that up front. And I'll take a look at the chat a little bit. God bless you. Sarah, God bless you. I hope that you have a good day. So as we start to think about them, we start to think, God bless you, that, you know, so we're talking about different societies. And as we begin to talk about the 25th Dynasty, you were talking about a group of people who are coming to power and really rising after a period of time when ancient Kemet had taken them over. So we're going to fast forward through the kingdom of Kerma. We're going to fast forward through the classic and the heyday of Kerma. We're going to fast forward through because at the same time the old kingdom was doing what they were doing in the old kingdom in Upper Kemet, they were doing what they were doing in Kerma and what would become, you know, Kush, if you will. So those societies are really trading and developing together. They're not operating in silos. They aren't operating without knowing each other. They aren't operating without interacting with each other. That takes place for thousands of years. And at periods of time, there are wars. At periods of times, there's friendliness. And there are also similarities in terms of things that develop in terms of shared heritage. But you can also imagine as people in Upper Nubia and what will become Kush develop their own right, they're going to have similarities with the people to the north, and they're going to develop their own traditions as well. They're going to put their own flavor on it. They're going to put their own sauce on it, if you will, which is what everybody does. You could be from you know, the Midwest and be from one state versus another and have your own flavor to what you do. You can be from Chicago or Detroit, not that far apart, but have your own way of doing things, even though you have a shared heritage. And certainly that happened in the Nubian area and with ancient Kush. So as we start to think about the 25th Dynasty, and we kind of really jump into the 25th Dynasty, you're talking about a period of time after the New Kingdom, after Kemet had come into the Nile Valley and had come there and taken over part of Kush around 1500 BC, and then things fell apart in ancient Kemet, and they retreated, and the Kushite Empire reemerged. You reemerged very strong, and the people that helped them reemerge were the people that we call the 25th Dynasty. And I want to make this known because they were significant in of themselves. They were not just people who were taking over Kemet, so they were the 25th dynasty of ancient Kemet. They had their own kingdom. They were running not just this area that would become Kemet. They were running this whole area around this whole. They were running this whole area up and down there. They had taken, a large part of the fragmentation that had taken place in the wake of Kemet controlling this part of Upper Nubia. They had taken these people and a lot of the fractions and the factions that had developed and brought them into one group, brought them under one land, under one rulership, and reemerged this Kushite empire. So a lot of times when we think about Kush, a lot of times we're referring to them, but it's kind of a reemergence of Kush. It's kind of a rebirth, if you will, kind of a coming back. And they have some remarkable things. And it's this family that did it, this family that Shepenwepet belongs to. And I want to kind of pull up a little bit of a family tree so that you can see that. And I'll remove myself real quick so you can get a little bit of picture of some of the people in this remarkable family tree that we have here. But even as we talk about this family tree, and I look at it, Kashta first, it's not just Kashta. Before Kashta, there's Alara. And Alara is, most likely his father, is the person who is credited with taking this whole area that is in Upper Nubia after the Kemetic people left, after the fall, if you will, of the new kingdom. And he brings them together. So when you think about what makes a person remarkable, what makes a man or a woman remarkable, it's really your ability to impact other people, your impact on other people, your impact to make people's lives better, your impact to really change the environment within which people live. And Alara, this gentleman who is credited with starting the 25th Dynasty, he is doing remarkable things in Upper Nubia. He is doing remarkable things in terms of bringing the different factions of people together under one land, under one roof, if you will. So imagine you being ruled by the Kemetic people for some 500 years, 550 years or thereabouts, where in some respects you already had a long culture and a long history that predated Kemet, even predated Kemet itself. And then you end up in a period of time where you're being controlled by people. And that happens a lot. It happens today. It happens in all parts of the world where you have one country come in and take over another country. Now you're controlled by them. And then that country falls or has problems in a way, and you are now reasserting your power. How do you bring people back together? And I think about it, and we think about ancient Kemetic people, we think about even African people today and the whole diaspora, and here in America and various places in the world. How do you bring back people together? How do you bring back people after they've been in a situation where they've been kind of subjugated, or they've had to take their culture to some extent, and kind of pay deference to somebody else? How do you bring somebody back when there are a bunch of different factions and separations and different ways of thinking? How do you do that? And although we don't have all the specifics, we know religion had a lot to do with it. Alara did an amazing job, and I want to remember his name. I want to kind of call his name Alara. He is someone who helped to take the initial part of this and then bring these people together under one roof, bring these people together under one rulership, find a commonality so that this ancient Kushite empire would rise again, so that people who were operating in separate silos, if you will begin to come together and take that strength and put it as one. And as he did that, he kicked off a family. He kicked off a heck of a family. And, after Alara, you end up having Kashta. And Kashta, just to give you kind of a peek of that, he kicked off what I said was a heck of a family. His family, God bless you. I know some people will say that, God bless you so much. Some people will say that the 25th Dynasty simply just copied ancient Kemet. I'll make a comment with that because somebody put that in the comments. Thanks so much for saying that. Some people will say that the 25th Dynasty simply copied ancient Kemet. We got to look at it. You got to look at it much, much deeper, a better lens. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it is not, it's up to us to start to look at history from our perspective. It's up to us to look at history with a different lens. We cannot take this Western lens that has been biased. For a long period of time, the people in this part of Sudan have been black people, were black for a long period of time, but archaeologists first looked at their society and their information and said these could not have been black people. They must have been some race of Northern Europeans or some race of Libyans who came down here and did this. They were wrong in their assessments in the beginning. Why will we take that fundamental bias that was there as they discovered these things and uncovered these things? Why will we let the legacy of that bias now color the way we look at them now? It's really up to you and me to look at this with a whole different lens. And we don't need to have anybody's, mind or thoughts or opinions in our heads, even especially if somebody's racist. We don't need to have a racist person's mind or opinions in our head as we think about our information and this information. We really have to simply just ignore that. We really have to go back and look at this and read this for ourselves. And what do you think? And history is all about understanding yourself. It's not just something that you put on a wall somewhere, an artifact that you put on a wall. It's about understanding of, and I believe that I believe that Kashta and the people who brought the Kushite people together after the New Kingdom took them over, I think they had some of that. I think they had the ability to say, we're not going to just go in the wake of somebody else, ruling us and controlling us and us not being able to put ourselves together? I think they found the answer to that. And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because they're remarkable, just not because of what they did, it's how long they did it and under what circumstances they did it. They did it in a time when people were divided, where people had been conquered, where there may have been people who didn't have a lot of confidence in themselves, where there was this great empire named, Kemet that was to the north of them that had come and taken them over. They did it within the context of some many things. And you got to know that the Kushite people, even though they were controlled, really by ancient Kemet for hundreds of years, they rebelled constantly. They rebelled. They adapted some Kemetic ways, but a lot of the Kemetic ways they were adapting because they related to the ways they already had. They already had a concept of cattle being venerated. That was in Nubia and in ancient Kush long before Kemet took them over. They already had an idea of God being expressed in various ways. That was in Kush and in Kemet long before people moved. They already had practices of burying people with artifacts and a belief in the afterlife. And they would lay them on one side facing either east or west and have them in a cradled position, just like they did in many parts of pre-dynastic Kemet before Kemet became a country. Those customs were already in place in what would become Kush in Upper Nubia long before Kemet became a country. There were a lot of things that they had in place that they believed in. So the idea of interacting with the Kemetic people wasn't as foreign to them as we might think. We just want to say they copied. It wasn't as foreign to them as you might think. And the other thing about it is very interesting. When you read Charles Bonnet, who did a whole literally like decades and decades of research and this whole area that is around this Defufa and this part of Kerma, you will find that the archaeological evidence shows that when the ancient Kemetic people came in and started taking over this part of Kemet during the New Kingdom, just before the second rise, if you will, the other rise of the Kushite kingdom, they built their own temporary towns and their own ceremonial towns. And that's what they did. That's what the Kemetic people did. When they took over an area, they would sometimes destroy the people's stuff, some of their stuff, and build their own little Kemetic town in an area. In this area, they built their own Kemetic town, but they took the temples, some of the temples that the Kushite people already had in place, and they did not destroy them. They kept them. And that was an odd thing to the archaeologists, because you don't see Kemetic people very often going places and leaving in place the local temples and the way they left them in place in ancient Kerma in the land that would become Kush. You see them almost respecting the deities in ancient Kush in a way that they had not respected the deities in maybe other places in their specific ceremonial town, So it's not that they weren't smart to know that I need to interact with people and the deities that they believe in, but in Kerma, and the area that would become Kush, and it was Kush, they left in place and seemed to have a respect for some of the deities in ancient Kush in a way that they did not do, archaeologically speaking, for other areas. So you might think there was this difference between ancient Kemet and ancient Kush, and that was just a mimicking, but it's not everything you think. It's not always the way you think it. So I just wanted to share that. And you will also find some, as you probably know, you will find some Nubian Kushite deities that are respected in ancient Kemet, that are revered and that are talked about. Even when you talk about, we were talking about Hatshepsut the other day, and we were talking about the land of Punt. When you look at the walls in Hatshepsut's temple, one of the deities that's deified and respected is a deity that's from Nubia. That's from Kush, and that is a deity that had to do with gold and wealth and resources. They were not only respecting our men in that wonderful temple that she built, where she talks about their expedition to Punt, they were also respecting a Nubian Kushite deity and god, and that god was drawn on the wall and respected as a part of their offerings that they were bringing forth. So it was very interesting. She wasn't just presenting it to our men. There's a scene where they're presenting it to a Nubian deity. So I wanted to point that out. So it may not be as they say it, as much as people say. So would avoid the very pretty. There you go. Share some people. There are lots to support our queens. There you go. God bless you. So we have to know that they're not just mimicking Kemet in the way that people want to think, and so and their ability to talk and to write, and what they decided to keep down and what they did not keep down were parts of their choice. We obviously know people had all kinds of ways of developing symbols. People had choices in the way they interacted, values that they put around things, other dynamics that forced them to doing certain things. So it's not important for us to look and try to put down a group of people when we know that they're human, just like you and I, when they were living under different circumstances and had different value systems that they felt were important. So as we think about that, And we'll get more, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about this a lot, right? We're going to be digging into this. But as we look into this and we kind of look at Kashta, I want to kind of just talk a little about each of these figures here. Kashta, King Kashta is the son of Alara, and he is around in the 8th century BC, and so is Alara in the 8th century BC, and they are formulating and formulating this whole kingdom that's going to be the next rise that will rise, guys, for well over another 1,000 years. They're going to be in existence for maybe 1,100 years. These people are putting in place a kingdom that will be in existence for almost 1,100 years. So we'll stop and think about that for a minute, because a lot of us will do things. And there are a lot of places now, even where you may be sitting now, and where I'm sitting. If you're sitting in America, it hasn't been around for 1,100 years. There are not a lot of people and a lot of places that can have a continuity of religion, continuity of to something like leadership, continuity of culture. Right? That's a difficult thing to do. A lot of people can't do that now. And a lot of people, where we are still celebrating our cultures, they're wearing American clothes. Not trying to be mean. I'm just saying American culture and American and hip hop and English language. A lot of that has permeated the entire world. You have a lot of people where you go and you look at their leaders, and you can see them online. Don't just look at their leaders online. Look at them in the United Nations. Look at them in their own countries. Look at them when they interact with people, and they're wearing American style clothes. Maybe they were made in their country, maybe they were, but they're not necessarily wearing their traditional style. The ability to develop a culture that will last for over 1,000 years is an amazing thing. So when I think about this 25th Dynasty, this Kashta and Alara, I'm thinking about a group of people who did something amazing, who were able to develop not only a culture, but a family and a people whose continuity would extend for over 1,000 years. And some of the things that people like to say that they picked up from the Kemetic people, which they made their own, which was amalgamation of what they were already doing, they continued to practice that for over 1,000 years. Even after Kemet fell, even after Kemet was invaded by the Romans, years and years after this, the Kushite people were still practicing that. They were still looking at Amen, which, Amani is the word for Amen in the Kushite language. They were still looking at Amen. They were still keeping up the ways that they had learned from thousands and from years and years earlier. They were still doing it in Kush, even after they'd almost forgotten it in ancient Kemet. I was reading yesterday something about Herodotus, and Herodotus was talking about how he interacted with the Egyptian priests and Kemetic priests when he was there in the 4th and 5th century BC. When he was alive, and reading some of that, and even looking at some of the things that Ewalish Budge talked about, you could see that the copying of the pyramid text and the Book of the Dead, the Pertin-Meru, you can see the copies of it. And Ewalish Budge in his Papyrus of Ani write-up says this. You can find the pyramid text, the coffin text, the Pertin-Meru, the Book of the Dead, so to speak. But by the time you get to the Greco part of it and the Greece control of ancient Kemet, a lot of these copyings, and it seemed as if some of the scribes didn't know what they were copying. There were a lot of mistakes, and you almost needed the old text to compare to the Greco text at that time, because they almost didn't know what they were writing. You almost couldn't make sense. This is his words, not mine. I can show you the quote. You almost could not make sense of what they were writing without referring to the older text by the time they got to that Greco period in ancient Kemet. So what I'm saying is the Kushite people were keeping up this custom. They were keeping up the customs as they were already amalgamating them with what they were already doing with themselves. And they were doing it for well over 1,000 years after it had almost been forgotten in some circles in ancient Kemet. And parts of ancient Egypt had almost forgotten this and were just practicing things and not really completely knowing what they were practicing. They were keeping it up in ancient Kush. And this was the family that started it. This is why they're amazing. Not just because they controlled ancient Kemet, because they were able to bring a people together and to keep that people together for over 1,000 years in a prosperous state. That's an amazing thing without being conquered. They had wars. They had fights, right? They won some, they lost some, but they were able to keep their people together in security for well over 1,000 years. So Kashta, what Kashta does after Alara, I believe is his father, after Alara kind of consolidated the power in Upper Kemet, Kashta comes along and he goes beyond this Upper Nubia part. He goes beyond this Kerma part, and he starts to push into Lower Nubia and into Upper Kemet. So as we start to think about it, and I'll check back on the chat just real quick. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I do appreciate that. God bless you. Thank you for saying it's your favorite YouTube channel. I very much appreciate that. God bless you. I hope that you are doing well. It's important for us to think about when we talk about Kashta and we talk about the quote unquote 25th dynasty, a lot of times we start with Piankhy. We start with Piankhy and we say how he went all the way up to Lower Kemet and took over all of Kemet. And we talk about Taharqo, who's an amazing figure, but we forget to talk about Kashta. And I think this is very important because after Alara, Kashta not only takes the power structure that's in Upper Nubia, he goes into Lower Nubia. And at this point in time, Kush is controlling this Upper Nubia part and Lower Nubia, going up into the first cataract of the Nile. That's an amazing area to be controlling. Kemet is not controlling it at this time. Kush is controlling it. And what Kashta does is he goes into Auset. He goes into Upper Kemet and he basically takes over. And the people in Upper Kemet do not treat him as if he's a foreigner. It doesn't even quite appear that there was this huge battle. It was pretty much like, we like you. It's pretty much like you are actually practicing and keeping alive our traditions. Now think about this. If this were such a foreign aspect, if this was such a hate relationship between Kemet and Nubia, as people like to say, even though they just paint Nubia with a blanket and don't talk about the different people, why would the priest in Auset be welcoming of Kashta? Why would the priest in Auset see the Kushite people as basically putting forth their traditions and doing it in the right way? There was apparently not this horrible situation. Kashta comes in and he takes over pretty much Upper Kemet. He is in charge. The temple is in charge. The temple is paying tribute to him. This is not a like a Kushite thing. This is Kemet paying tribute to and paying deference to Kush and treating Kashta as the king of Upper Kemet. And he's the king of Kush. He's controlling this whole area in Lower Kemet, and he's controlling Upper Kemet, and he has control of the temple of Karnak. I mean, we have to stop. And like I said, when people start to say that there's this particular relationship with ancient Kush, or they take the 25th dynasty and they try to put it in a small kind of box, you have to break away from that a bit, because it is not just Piankhy, it's his dad. It's before Piankhy. He is coming in Upper Kemet, and the biggest, most beautiful, probably most famous, one of the most famous temples ever in the history of the world is under Kushite control. And the powerful priests at Auset are paying deference to him, and they like it. They're not mad about it. They're not saying this is horrible. They're not saying you're a foreigner. They're not saying any of that people like to take ancient Kush and Kemet and separate them. That's not what the history shows, and that's not what the Kemetic priests did. They didn't do that. In fact, when Kashta became king and took over, he was already king of Kush. When he took over Upper Kemet, the southern part of Kemet, he had his daughter, Amenarteris, be installed, if you will, as the head, the chief priestess at the temple of Karnak, Petshut. So I've talked about this before, and I'll talk about this again. It was an amazing office to hold. This whole idea of being God's wife of a man, this whole idea of controlling and being in control of the temple of Petshut was a significant thing, in particular under the Kushite dynasty. And I'll just kind of roll through it and share a couple things I've gone through, and in the past I've kind of talked about some of the things that they did in terms of what just the person who was in charge of this whole area. So I'm just kind of showing you a little bit on screen, and I've talked a little about this, and I'll make this available to people who are subscribers and members. But the whole person who was God's wife of Amen, of which Amenarteris, Kashta's daughter, had a whole line of resources. I mean, this is just a line of an example of when her niece took over and passed it on to someone else, the types of resources that were given to them on a daily basis, on a regular basis. And there was bread, there were resources, there was land given to them that she had control over all over Kemet. So I'm just like going down the list. I mean, and it kind of gives you, whether it's from Sais or Butu, other temples from all over ancient Kemet were paying dues to the God's wife of Amen. The documents don't say that they were paying dues to the priest. It doesn't say that these endowments, if you will, that these control of all these resources, and there were many resources and many acres of land, like a whole lot of land all over Kemet, they were being put into the use for Petshut, specifically for the God's wife of Amen. It was a remarkable thing. It was a remarkable thing. So she is not just dealing with a little bit. All of these temples all across, they list the temples that are giving resources to God's wife of men. They're all going into the person who's controlling basically a Petshut. And at this time, when Kashta becomes in control, it becomes his daughter. He makes his daughter God's wife of men. And you see, not only do you see with the 18th dynasty and the 18th dynasty of ancient Kemet, you see them begin to do more things more overtly with women. You see them, the queens, taking more of a more upfront and public display and kind of role, if you will, being hand in hand, side by side with their husbands. And a lot of times you'll see the markers saying husband and wife and talking about them kind of ruling together or mentioning them in very godlike terms together. You see that in the 18th dynasty. That's a remarkable thing. And when the Kushite people take over, because they're bringing this from Kush, it will be later on in the Kushite dynasty, in this Kushite era, that you have queens like Amani Torre and Amani Renus, who took on the Roman army, who led armies as generals themselves. So you talk about a strong history of women with the Kushite. And Kashta, one of the first things he does to solidify his power and give power to his daughter, he took his daughter, Menadiris right here, and she becomes God's wife of men. And she is essentially in control of essentially one of the most important people, or the most important person at Ipet-Sut, at the Temple of Karnak. And this is a Kushite woman. And so when you start to think about it, you say, wow, what are they doing here? As people start to say, oh, did they hate Kush? Was it this hate relationship? People only want to give you quotes about, what was happening in the 12th dynasty or something that a quote at the fortress at Buhen that happened during the Middle Kingdom, or some sandal that was on Tutankhamen. They don't tell you the whole story. And when they get to the 25th dynasty, they leave all the stuff out. They usually tell you just a little teeny bit of it, tell you when they fell and how it got out, and they leave the rest out. But the archaeology and the history tells a different story. And so as we start to look at it, not only does Amenadiris basically become in control and one of the most important people at the Temple of Karnak, when Kashta dies, his son Piankhy is now in control. And so keep in mind now this is not people don't sometimes consider Kashta to be the head of the 25th dynasty. They don't consider, when they say 25th dynasty, they don't put Kashta in it. They start with Piankhy because he's the one who did the military control and went all the way up and took over the rest of Kemet. But that's not telling you that his dad was already in the southern part of Kemet, in control of the temple of Ipet-Sut, the temple of Karnak, and the people he was in control of the area. He was already in control of the area. So we really need to expand our idea of the 25th dynasty. And someone put down in the comments, they simply like to say that they were mimicking the Kemetic people. You got to look at that. And they make it seem like the Nubians invaded and the Greeks were welcome. And there's a whole part, because they didn't hate the Greeks either, because the Persians were in charge of that. But we can talk about that. God bless you. That's a good point that you made. God bless you. So as we think about it, we have to stop talking about the 25th dynasty as if it just began with Piankhy. To me, that's just a way for people to limit the impact of this Kushite empire that was already in place before Piankhy. It was in place before Piankhy with his father and his grandfather. They were already taking over and consolidating Upper Nubia. They had already taken over Lower Nubia, and they had taken over Upper Kemet. They had taken over Auset, and Ipet-Sut was in their control. So that to me is significant. I don't downplay that because he didn't have Memphis. It's almost like Western philosophy and Western historians, a lot of times we like to draw these lines in the sand, and we like to try to say, well, this wasn't this unless it was this way. You know what I mean? That's amazing. And the people who were in control, the Valley of the Kings is in Auset, guys. Your whole Hatshepsut and the New Kingdom, and you want to go Akhenaten, you want to go Ramses II. All of these most famous dynasties in ancient Kemet, even the Middle Kingdom is centered in Auset. The Middle Kingdom, they're centered in Auset, and the priests who have that legacy, who are guarding that legacy, who are taking control of that, are welcoming the Kushite people and working with them hand in hand. They're smiling and working. They are not seeing them as odds, as foreign. They're not seeing them in any way like that. That's not what's happening. So by the time Piankhy comes, right, Kashta passes away, obviously, and his son Piankhy becomes the next king. So Piankhy is Piye. We want to say Piankhy is a significant ruler. He is. I love talking about Piankhy. In my new book, Religion of the Black Land, I have a whole write up. He has a whole wonderful stela that talks about his conquest of ancient Kemet. And it's so filled with morals. It's so filled with consciousness and a morality involved in what he was doing. It's an amazing document. I think that if you're reading, Kemetic documents that have to do with the history of Kemet, it's in the top 5 documents. It's one of the documents you have to read. Teachings of Ptahhotep there, but the Victory Stela of Piankhy, which was included in Upper Nubia around Merneptah at Jebel Barco. That's where they found it. That it was found in Nubia. That's where they found it. In Kush, it is one of the top 5 documents, I believe, in Kemetic history and Kushite history. If you want to read about this area, I'd certainly recommend reading about his victory stele. I have it in my book, but you can certainly find that and read that. Piankhy becomes the next king, and his sister Amenarderis is in charge of the temple of Karnak. She's in charge of a pedestal. And Piankhy, he writes about this whole saga, really, of how the people in Kemet were concerned, because he was in control of Upper Kemet. He inherited from his dad, right? So Kemet was firmly under control. People don't say that when they don't really give you the full length of that. When they talk about Piankhy taking over the rest of Kemet, they don't give you that he was already in control of Upper Kemet because his dad did it, right? So he is in control of Upper Kemet. And in the lower part of Kemet, a coalition formed. And he names the people. It's such a wonderful document. He names the people, and they start taking over towns and consolidating towns, just like the Kushite people did way down here. They start consolidating towns in Lower Kemet, and they start trying to push south, because basically they want to challenge the Kushite people. They want to take over. They want Auset. Auset is still the jewel. It is still the most powerful and one of the most powerful cities and areas, entire areas, if you will, in ancient Kemet. And the people up north, they weren't satisfied with just coalescing their power. Remember, this whole area has a whole bunch of resources that are coming up and down the Nile Valley, because they could have just consolidated their power in the north and traded with the Aegean Sea and the people in the Phoenicians and the various places, right? They could have traded with people up north, but they didn't need the south, really, but they needed the south. They wanted. People will make you think that there wasn't this really important relationship. There was a significant relationship with the countries and the people that were to the south and the southern part of Kemet, because they had a lot of resources. Because at this point in time, when these northern people were getting together and forming coalitions, they could have just stayed. They could have just formed their country and just, focused on the Aegean Sea and the Greek people who were beginning to develop. They could have just focused on that and be happy, right? But they didn't. They needed that south. They needed that trade. They needed that tribute. They needed that power and that talent that was in the south. So they start marching south. And when they march south, Piankhy talks about, he gets a message. They come to him down in Merneptah. If you see Merneptah right there, you see that little triangle right there around the 4th Cadillac where it says Merneptah. They send a delegation to him. The people in Auset, which is most likely the priests, because at this time it wasn't really a ruler. The people, it was being ruled from Merneptah. You really didn't have strong rulers. You had priests who were in charge, and they were paying tribute to Merneptah, basically. And they didn't have rules like they had before. The people in Auset, most likely the priests, send a delegation to Piankhy, to King Piankhy in Merneptah, and they say, do you know what's going on? Have you heard what's going on? I mean, King Piankhy has his army there. He has his army in Auset. They say, the people in the north, they're starting to consolidate. They're starting to march farther south, and we want you to send more troops. We want you to come. We're welcome. Come. This is your land. Do you not know? They ask him, have you forgotten your land? Think about this for a minute. The priest in Auset are going to King Piankhy, and they're asking him, have you forgotten your land? Are you a father who's forgetting your land and your children? We need your help. If these people from the north are coming, right? We hear them, they're coming. They're conquering towns in the north, and they're coming for Auset. And you may want to send more troops. You may want to send a bigger presence, because are you forgetting us? This is not a situation where the priests of Auset are hating the Kushite people. They are not looking at disrespect to Piankhy. They're saying, Piankhy, this is your land. You are in charge. You are in charge of Auset and Upper Kemet. Come get us, because these people in the north are coming for us. And Piankhy says at first, he sends some more troops. He says at first, before I go anywhere, I'm going to give prayer to our men. He doesn't seem moved. He doesn't appear shaken in this victory stele. He doesn't respond with panic, right? He lets his army go to do some fighting. He gives them instructions. He said, when you go meet the people, and he tells them where to meet them. When you meet them, they're going to meet them above or north of Auset. When you meet them, make sure you look them straight in the eyes. Make sure you tell them if they have other people that they're gathering together to fight you, wait for them. Don't surprise attack them. He tells his army this. Do not surprise them and attack. Tell them if they have other people that are going to join in the fight against us, go get them. Wait for the other enemies to all come together. Don't attack them at night. Attack them in the broad daylight. And you tell them that our men, God is the God who sent us. Our men is the God who sent us. That the victory we're about to have over you is coming from God. So get all your people, Get everybody, whether they speak your language or not, gather them all together. We're going to fight you in the daylight. We're not going to surprise attack you. And they did it. And they won a lot of battles, but it goes on beyond that. Piankhy eventually comes himself and does an amazing thing. But before he comes and leads the army himself and goes all the way up to Anu and to Memphis, Hecapata, and that whole Delta area, taking over many, many cities. Before he does that, he goes to the temple of Auset. And at the temple of Auset, in Ephesus, where his sister is probably God's wife of men, still God's wife of men, he goes and he performs a ceremony. And we talked yesterday about some of the priests in ancient Kemet, how they did festivals and how they did things where they would march through the sea and, or march through the area, march through the city, if you will, march through the streets. And they would carry images of men or various statues of deities. Well, there were certain things that the king would do as well. And at the beginning of the year, the New Year's ceremony, there was a special role that the king played. Only the king could do it. It wasn't something that a priest could do. Only the ruler of the land could do this. God bless you, 20 plus generations. Yeah. If you have, only the king could do this at this time. So King Piankhy goes, before he goes to war himself, he had already sent his troop, but before he went to war himself, he went to Auset. He went there and he went to Auset in the area that is in Kemet, the center, guys. This is Thebes. The famous Thebes that you hear about now. If you go back and you visit today, in Egypt, if you go visit Thebes, you would visit Ephesus. You would see the Valley of the Kings. You would see all of that there. He goes to that area, and all this stuff is already built. All this stuff is already kind of old, if you will. He goes to Ephesus, and he performs the rites and the ceremonies and the rituals as king. Piankhy does. The priests are saying, "You come. This is your job." And before he goes to war himself, he says, I'm going to go pray to our men first. I'm going to go perform the festival that they do at the beginning of the year, the New Year's festival. I'm going to give God his due first, give God his offerings, and do my role as king in this ceremony before I go and do the rest of the fight. So as he's doing this, he's marching up and down. He does this first, and it gives you an idea that the southern part of Kemet was in no way in rebellion against the Kushite people. They were accepting him. They accepted him, and they looked at him as their king, as their ruler. They had, and many times when ancient Kemet was separated, when the north was separated from the south, the people who were in the north or the south still considered themselves Kemet. They still considered themselves practicing the old way. They were still doing the same things that they were doing when the Valley of Kings was new, right? This was still the Kemetic people. They saw the Kushite people as their rightful rulers, as people who were keeping up the tradition of Amen, as people who understood their religion and understood their perspective of God. It was not foreigners. And so there was no pushback, and they were part of the ceremony, conducting this entire ceremony with Amanidiris as the God's wife of Amen. And King Piankhy, as you probably know, ends up taking over Kemet. He ends up going all the way through the north. He ends up going well north of Auset, going into all of these important areas, whether it's in Nekten or in various places, Hermopolis, various places like that, as he leads up to what was a famous and a remarkable battle in Hecapata, which was Memphis. And at the place in Memphis, he literally gets his army to line up their boats and to line their boats in a way, because they couldn't really get over the walls and the way it was fortified, to line their boats in a way where they were able to climb from boat to boat, using it almost as a water bridge to be able to get to the walls of Memphis and to take over the city. It was a remarkable thing he did. He ends up taking over this whole area and going to the temple of Ra in Anu, which was another significant place, and taking that over as well, and performing all the rites, all the rituals that only a king could do. As you probably know, in temples, there were areas in the temples that were holies of holies, where the holy statue of the deity was kept, and nobody could go in there unless you were like the high priest or very, very important. Well, Piankhy in his travels up went to the temple at Memphis of Ptah, went to the temple of Ra and Anu in Heliopolis, and went to the holies of holies area, and went into the room by himself, broke the seal on the door that the priest put on it, entered into the room, and had his conversation with his father as he said it. And the priest stood on the outside as he did it. It gives you an idea that you saw these Kushite people who were practicing and understood the Kemetic religion, and were doing it in a way that they were completely respected in doing so. So as we do that, as he moves, as Piankhy becomes king, when Piankhy becomes king, his daughter, Shepenwepet II, if you see her right here, she becomes the next God's wife of men. She inherits this position at Ephesus and Auset from her aunt, Amanidiris. And so when you start to see that, she is someone who is inheriting that, and this is her. This is a picture of her. This is a symbol of, an image of Shepenwepet II. This is Shepenwepet II. She is the daughter of Piankhy, she's the daughter of Piankhy. She is the niece of Menedera. She is the granddaughter of Kashta. She is somebody who becomes the God's wife of men. As you take a look at her, just to kind of give you just another just good picture of her, a better picture of her, you can see that's her. That's an image of her, and you would see her kind of taking the ankh to her nose, kind of the breath of life. Either she's being given the breath of life or helping to give the breath of life in a part of her ceremonies in terms of being a very high priestess, Adipet. So that's Shepenwepet II, and she is a Kushite. She's a part of this whole Kushite family, which is why it's a remarkable family. So when they talk about the 25th dynasty, a lot of times they leave out very important people. And you would most of the time not hear about Kashta and the fact that he took over Upper Kemet before his son did. You hear about Piankhy, who I just mentioned. You never hear about Amanideris, really. You hear about Piankhy, and then you hear about his successor and probably his brother Shabaka, and then you hear about Taharqo. And then you hear about when they lose it, right? But you don't hear anything about Kashta. You don't hear anything about Amanideris. You don't hear anything about Shepenwepet II. You hear very little about Amanideris II. You don't hear about these people who also played very important roles in ancient Kemet and roles at the Temple of Karnak. You find 3 successions there. You have 2 women who actually held the office and the other one who was about to hold the office, Amanideris I, Shepenwepet II, and Amanideris II. These are all women who were some of the most powerful women in all of Kemet. And they were controlling and the resources I just showed you, examples of the resources, they were controlling a whole line of resources in ancient Kemet, a whole line of resources that they were controlling, that were being given to them on a regular basis that they had control of. So when you start to think about that, you start to understand that there are a lot more people in this 25th dynasty, if you will, that were significant other than what they tell us about, right? Many more people whose lives and their contributions in ancient Kemet, Adipet and Karnak, as well as for their whole country, right? So after Piankhy, just so you can know who some of these people are as we start to talk about them, after Piankhy, God bless you, the Egyptians are the same people. Their relation. We could talk about that. So after Piankhy, his other relative Shabaka becomes in play, and so you think about Shabaka, and Shabaka is significant. I love the Shabaka stone. And when you think about the Shabaka stone, if you've heard about the Shabaka stone, if you've heard about the Memphite theology, and maybe you've heard about it, you probably know about it, or if you haven't, I'll tell you about it now to some extent. This whole Memphite theology, this whole theology of there being one creator, of this creator manifesting and bringing into life through what he thought in his mind, thought in his heart, and brought forth with his tongue, those things that Ptah put in his heart, thought about in his heart, dreamt about and willed, and spoke with his tongue, that he brought forth all the deities, all of mankind, all creeping things through what was in his heart and what's in his tongue. That whole concept, which is sublimely and really told beautifully in the Shabaka throne, also called the Memphite theology. And it's only called the Memphite theology is because Shabaka had this written and sent this tablet apparently from where he was, either in Merneptah or in Auset, and had it sent to Memphis, maybe because Piankhy had taken over Memphis, and maybe it was like kind of like an olive branch, like a way of acknowledging we are still the same, and I'm giving you this gift, and I'm making this contribution, and I tell you what I think of Ptah, as Memphis is the city of Ptah. So the Kemetic people and the Kushite people saw no conflict between Amen being God and being an expression of God, Ptah being an expression of God. These are just expressions of one true God that manifested himself in various different ways. It manifests itself in various different ways. And there was no conflict in that. Just like you have a garden that brings forth many different flowers that's coming from the same ground, right? You have this amazing God that's bringing forth amazing trees and amazing gardens. And these things are all coming from the same source. So there wasn't a conflict with them looking at and adoring and respecting Amen, as well as respecting Ptah as being a creator God. They did not see any conflict in that. And that is expressed, that concept of one God, one creator. And it's expressed in other ways. It isn't the first time. It is expressed in other ways. Kemetic people had this idea for a while, but it is, a lot of times people will call it one of the first expressions, like that, and the first complete expression that they see of this type of Memphite theology being associated with Ptah and how it's written out. And it was written during Shabaka's time. Shabaka says that it was a part of an older document that had been worm-eaten and that had almost decayed, and that he was going to write it anew in his time with a new interpretation of this old document, putting his own stuff into it, if you will, his own thoughts into it, his own theology, his own philosophy, and making it better than it was before in the time of the ancestors. And so this Memphite theology, which is also the Shabaka stone, is really a Kushite That's a Kushite man. It's named after a Kushite king who was not just king of Kemet, he was king of Kush, which Kemet was a part of Kush at the time. So he sends this Memphite theology, this Shabaka stone, to Memphis, and that's where it was found in the temple there. This is Shabaka. It is the famous Shabaka stone, and it's a wonderful thing to read. I have that also in my new book, Religion of the Black Land. I have the Shabaka stone written in there. And so it becomes a significant thing. So you start to see how the Kushite people in the Kushite land, they're doing a lot. They're doing a lot, and they're running this whole area from Merneptah. They're running this area from around the Fourth Cataract. That remains the capital of their kingdom. That's where the king is. Even when Piankhy came and killed a lot of people and took over this whole area, he went back to Merneptah. He didn't see a need to stay in Kemet or northern Kemet. He didn't do it. He went back home and said, okay, you guys pay your tribute. He left his people in place. He left his administrators and his army and stuff in place, but he went back to the capital. They never abandoned their capital. It was always the center was in Merneptah. And so you have Shabaka taking over after Piankhy and the famous Shabaka stone. And this is all part of the same family, guys, which is why it's such an important family, if you will, and dynasty and group, if you will. So not only do you have Shabaka and Piankhy, and then after that, you're going to have Shabek II comes as well. Another person who's king comes after Shabaka. And then you have Taharqo. And Taharqo comes, and Taharqo is an amazing person, is also a famous person. And we'll see if we can pull up like a picture of him, if we can kind of pull up something with respect to Shabaka here, we can kind of look at him. So as we look, and this is one of the other members, the later member of the family, if you will, of the dynasty. But as we look at that, this is an image, a Shabti of Taharqo. And this is one of these tiny images that are usually included in a tomb, usually included as a potential worker or helper for the person when they're deceased. But this is an image of Taharqo. And Taharqo is of the same 25th dynasty. He's of the same area that is in ancient Kemet and ancient Kush. He's of the same family. And Taharqo is somebody who becomes a significant person. As you start to see, he is also the son and child of Piankhy. And, his sister becomes, Shepenwepet II becomes the God's wife of Amen, Petshut. And Taharqo becomes a person who is a remarkable person. There are all kinds of stories about Taharqo. There's all kinds of building expeditions and campaigns that he went on. He is famously known for being mentioned in the Bible. And if you look up, and you can tell, I'll give it to you, you can write it down if you want. But 2 Kings 19:9, he's mentioned, and in Isaiah 37:9, he's mentioned. So 2 Kings 19:9 and Isaiah 37:9, they mentioned Taharqo. That's the Taharqo that they're talking about. And at the time when they mention this, they're talking about a time when King Hezekiah is basically under attack and is being sieged by the Assyrians. They're basically, attacking parts of this area, what would become Israel, and attacking areas in that. And they attack one area, which is Lachish, and then they go to basically have a siege, if you will, on Jerusalem. And it says, as a part of this, as a part of this whole narrative around this war, or this potential war that's about to take place, it talks about the King Taharqo. It says, King of the Ethiopians comes to bring his army to attack the king of Assyria, to attack this particular Assyrian king, and to meet him in battle. And the king gets that message, and it's not completely clear if he turns away from Jerusalem because of that, or what exactly happens. But it mentions that that Taharqo, who's king of Ethiopia, is coming to you, king of Assyria, and he's coming to meet you in battle. Now, at this time, when this was written in the Bible in 2 Kings 19:9 and in Isaiah 37:9, at this time when this is written about Taharqo, he's not actually king. At this, he's not actually the king. He is probably Shabaka or one of his other brothers. He's not king. He's probably a young person who is obviously in line to be king. And at the time, he's running the army. So when this particular message is sent to the king of Assyria, sent in this way, and that's mentioned in the Bible, Taharqo is a general. He's running the army. He's controlling things, but he's not quite king. It isn't until a little bit later on, after this time period, where he does become king. But it's believed that he met the Assyrian army in battle. And whatever happened, he didn't die, which was an amazing thing, because the Assyrian people were killing a lot of people at this time in history. And then there's later on, after he's ruling for decades, you do have invasions that take place with the Assyrian people. and a number of different things happen. But this remarkable thing Taharqo becomes a person because, he does more than just, end up fighting the Assyrians 2 or 3 times and taking 1 or 2 losses from them in a significant way. He is somebody who's doing building campaigns up and down ancient Kemet. He's somebody who's restoring things. He's doing building campaigns there in Auset, at Karnak, and various places like that. He's also doing things in Merneptah. Some of the places, some of the things that you see in Merneptah are being built by Taharqo or being refurbished by Taharqo. He is someone who's setting in place a lot of this culture that will continue to exist for, as I mentioned, over 1,000 years after he dies, after he's gone. So you start to remember and you start to think about this whole 25th Dynasty, and there's more that I can do. There's more I can talk about there. There's so much more I want to get into in depth about each one of these people that I just talked about, but in addition to that, about their successors, as well about some of the cities that you see here. So I wanted to share this. I'm going to be doing much more about them, going deeper, because all of these areas become very fascinating areas that we can learn a lot about with respect to the Kushite dynasty and the Kushite kingdom and empire that lasted for many, many years. So I want to say God bless you. Thank you so much for joining me. Please tell somebody about this, share this with somebody, and put your comments down below. Thank you so much. God bless you.